You know, there's not very many people in this world that can make the claim that they had extensive conversations with Jacob Waltz, especially during his illness and on his deathbed. But there are 4 people that we know did have extensive conversations with Jacob. One was Julia Thomas, the owner of a bakery, Ronnie Patrash, who worked at the bakery, Richard Holmes, and Gideon Roberts. Gideon Roberts was as old as the Dutchman and died a short time later. But here we have the only known picture of Jacob Waltz. In this picture you see behind the bar is Ronnie Patrash. Behind him is Mr. Thomas. And of the 3 gentlemen seated at the counter, the middle gentleman is Jacob Waltz. Now this picture was taken by a photographer who was doing photography of the businesses to put in the Phoenix Business Gazette. The story goes pretty much like this. In October of 1891, there was a flood on the Salt River. And one of the stories goes that Jacob Waltz's adobe was swept away in the flood. But there's another story that when they sent out a boat to rescue people, they found Jacob Waltz in his adobe in about 2 feet of water. And I believe that story more than I believe the one about the Salt River flood, because Waltz's 160 acres was 450 yards from the Salt River. But on the southeast corner of his property, he allowed the Dutch ditch to be dug across the corner of his property. And it was the Dutch ditch that overflowed and left his adobe standing in about 2 feet of water. And you know what water does to adobe. His foundation began to dissolve and his house began to collapse and left it unlivable. And this is, you know, a lot of people have asked the question, well, if his house was swept away in a flood, why wasn't the gold swept away? Well, his house wasn't swept away. It just simply dissolved, and they were able to save all of his goods, including the box of gold, out of his adobe and take it to Julia Thomas's, where she took care of him during his illness because he had contracted pneumonia. Ronnie and Julia were subject to many statements by Jacob Waltz during this illness time. But when it got really bad, she went searching for a doctor, and it was Gideon Roberts and Richard Holmes that was watching the Dutchman while she was searching for the doctor. Now, Julia was really upset when Richard Holmes ended up with the gold. She thought that it should rightfully be hers because she took care of the Dutchman during this whole period of time, from October to December when he died. But there was some legal activity involved in this, and she claimed that Holmes had stolen that gold. But Holmes had Gideon Roberts as a witness, and he was awarded the gold. Now, another name that we have that's been come up a few times in history that may have known the Dutchman, may have spoken to him from time to time, but certainly has a great deal to do with the Lost Dutchman legend, and that's a man named Joe Porterie. Joe Porterie was a Frenchman, and he came to America when he was 15 years old and became a high-quality assayer. In fact, he was the chief assayer for the Vulture Mine. And when Holmes sold the gold to the Goldman Jewelry Store, he was the one that done the actual assay. Then he put to bed the rumors that had been circulating that Waltz had high-graded the gold out of the Vulture Mine, and this is where the gold came from. But Porterie said, yeah, there was some rich gold in the Vulture Mine, but it was absolutely nothing like the Dutchman's gold. And in fact, many historians have searched, and there's absolutely no evidence whatsoever that Jacob Waltz ever worked at the Vulture Mine. Joe Porterie would certainly know the difference between the Dutchman's gold and other gold in Arizona, because not only was he the chief assayer for the Vulture mine, he also was the chief assayer for the Mammoth mine at Goldfield, and undoubtedly did assays for other mines in the immediate area. We have here a picture of an assay report for the Mammoth mine, and you can see how many assays were done at each level down around the 1,000-foot area. And on each of the drifts, numerous assays were done. I think a lot of people believe that, you know, somebody goes out here and they find some ore with some gold in it, they bring it to an assayer, he tells you how many ounces per ton you'd be expected to get out of your workings. But no, assays go on constantly inside of mines. We have a picture here of some faults, showing how faults slipped from side to side, up and down, and even make curves and stuff like that. And while you're mining the gold here and you run into a fault, that fault has shifted, and now you've got to search for the vein again, and you've got to take assays to see if you're making any money while you're doing that. There's just a lot goes on here with assays. And every mine, even hundreds of yards apart, have different qualities in the ore that makes them a fingerprint. And a good assayer not only knows what mine an assay came out of, the ore came out of, he knows what level of the mine it came out of. So Joe Porterie was in a perfect position to be able to tell you whether or not the Dutchman's gold came from any of the mines in Goldfield area. Now here we have a photograph at the Black Queen mine, which is several hundred yards north of the Mammoth mine. And I want you to notice on the picture where a line is drawn almost down through the middle of the drawing, and it shows the granites or the bedrock on one side and is labeled volcanics on the other side. We've always heard that there's no such thing as gold in volcanic areas. And all this area is a collapsed caldera from volcanic activity, all the Goldfield area. And here's a drawing, an actual drawing of volcanics right up against bedrock. Here we have another picture of a diagram of an intrusion in the Mammoth mine, showing where the volcanics burst through and covered several mines, including the Wasp mine and another mine that I hadn't heard of that's close by. So to close this story, I want to remind you that the owner of the matchbox, which is alive and well today, subjected his matchbox at the School of Mines in Nevada to a non-destructive test. And that test was compared to all the known mines in the Goldfield area and the Vulture mine. And the test proved that the Lost Dutchman's gold is from a totally unknown source. In other words, any mine that's already been assayed that would be compared to the matchbox should prove that it did or did not come from any of those known assayed mines. And the Dutchman gold is from a totally unassayed, unknown mine. Many people have claimed to have found the Lost Dutchman mine, but not one of them has come up with a piece of gold that's been compared to the matchbox. And that's why we have a mystery of the Superstition Mountains.
Thank you for watching this episode of Mysteries of the Superstition Mountains.